Well, good evening. This is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont State Senate. It's Thursday, April 16th. I want to talk to you today about a series of updates as we continue to work our way through this public health and economic crisis. And I'm going to have a little bit of emphasis on both sides of the crisis ledger. And want to provide just a starting update of the numbers in Vermont. And I've mentioned in recent days, not only has the Public Health Commissioner suggested we might be reaching a plateau, as he puts it, today's numbers seem to continue to reinforce that sentiment. So we had 9 new cases yesterday, following on, I believe, 9 the day before and 4 the day before that. We now have 35 individuals who have died after being infected with COVID-19. That's up 5 from yesterday, but the numbers, we believe, just weren't reported in some previous days, which means it wasn't that 5 people passed away yesterday, but it was over a period of time. The number of people hospitalized right now with COVID-19, 33. The number who are hospitalized under suspicion of having COVID-19 is 25. So 68 people basically hospitalized right now throughout Vermont, either with COVID-19 or likely to have it. That combined number of 58 is important because the plateauing that is described really speaks to the number of people who are being hospitalized with the most acute symptoms from the virus, and speaks to all of our preparation to make sure we had surge medical capacity in case a hospital facility got overwhelmed because of a number of cases. So all of these people are still in very dire situations, and but I do believe that this plateauing suggests that our efforts are working to prevent even worse numbers and will help us guide our path forward in the days ahead. I'm going to transition a little bit to a couple economic issues and some of the strategies that are being deployed to try to get people out of the current economic malaise that we're in. And if you haven't checked out, I posted on my Facebook page a graphic that shows the number of unemployment applications by week for the last 30 years. And I've described the first wave of applicants as a tsunami that hit the Department of Labor. And when you look at the image, which I'll post on the comments under this later, you will see that the tsunami metaphor was quite apt in contrast to any other week that we've ever experienced. But shifting gears slightly to the small business side. So there was some fanfare when the federal government passed its relief bill, the $2.2 trillion relief bill, that there were a couple strategies that were meant to support the business community to get them back on their feet, be able to reemploy people as quickly as possible. One of probably the signature program was a $350 billion program called the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program. The idea there was to provide a quick loan up to a very substantial amount of money for employers so that they could take the money and then bring back the people they'd laid off and continue their operations. This is obviously not going to be an immediate solution for all businesses because some of them aren't even allowed to get their operations going again. But the eligible uses for this money are payroll, mortgage expenses, rent, utilities, things like that. So it will be helpful to many Vermont businesses who would prefer to have their employees on the payroll rather than on the unemployment rolls. We learned today that throughout Vermont, 4,886 businesses have been approved under the federal PPP. Now, some of them are still in the process of being notified. They have to apply for these through their local bank. And that process, because it was wheeled out very quickly with almost no instructions, has taken everyone a little bit by surprise, and people are winging it a little bit. But the good news is that for 4,886 employers, money is going to be on the way to help restore some version of order bring people back onto the payroll to continue to do work. The 4,886 approved loans totals $853.7 million that will be coming to Vermont over the next 8 to 10 weeks. That's a huge sum of money, which will help offset many of the impacts that this has had on our unemployment system. If people can be brought back on the payroll, obviously their nightmare trying to get unemployment is coming to an end, though they're still eligible for some of the benefits that they've been entitled to. Vermont, this is, I think, a sign of how nimble our employers are, our small businesses in particular, and our local banks. Vermont is third per capita in the country in terms of accessing the funds through this PPP program. So we by far do not have the most loans that have been approved, and the dollar amount doesn't compare to the, I believe, 11 billion that New York State has received. But on a per capita basis, which recognizes our small scale, third best program in America, which I think is a good thing. 90% of those loans have gone through Vermont banks. The other 10% have gone through Vermont credit unions. So it's a real testament to how quickly many of the loan officers at the banks and credit unions have been able to move. Effectively, they were given one day to get the guidance from the federal government and then immediately start picking up the phones the next morning and process loans in a first come, first serve federal program. And that was important because that $350 billion loan program, the money's now gone. It's all been claimed or accounted for by applicants throughout the country. Right now, the federal government is debating whether and how to expand upon this PPP program, knowing that there are many businesses who either couldn't get the application in on time or did, but were just too late to be able to access some of the funds. And I won't get into the back and forth of the political discussion, except to say that in the U.S. Senate, the Senate Republicans are advocating for a $250 billion expansion of this PPP program. The Democrats in the Senate are saying, yes, we like the $250 billion, but we want another $250 billion, half of which would go for personal protective equipment for people working in healthcare and other at-risk professions, and then the other $125 billion of that extra portion to go to state and local governments to make up for all the revenues that have dried up, putting our ability to provide services at the state and local level in peril. So to me, for all the belly aching and the drama of the two factions in the Senate, to me it seems likely there will be an additional bit of relief. It's just a matter of timing and the precise nature. So for those businesses out there who applied and were told that it was too late, talk to your bank and get back in the hopper, because it's going to be really important to be first in line the next wave of dollars. A couple other updates. First, I want to recognize that for many college students, this is obviously a terrible time, especially college seniors who should be wrapping up and bringing the conclusion 4 years or more of study at a particular institution. And the COVID-19 crisis has really robbed students of that. It's robbed their families of the experience of supporting students as they finish their finals, of all the normal trappings that come with being at a higher ed institution. UVM has done two things to partially offset the economic impact. So UVM transitioned to remote learning pretty quickly. And we know that just like with our K through 12 system, to go from in-person learning to remote, for those who haven't chosen it in the first place, is quite a jarring experience. But the faculty and students are soldiering on and doing the best they can to have the remote learning be of the same level of quality as the in-person learning to the extent possible. But in recognition that many students who were housed on campus paying for rooms and board, and that they're not there now. So UVM has provided a partial housing refund to on-campus students and a prorated meal credit since students aren't using meal plans on campus. And I think the grand total is something on the order of $10 million. And I'm sure there will be some students who wish it was more. But I do want to acknowledge that just like our state college system, UVM is facing a major financial hit as a result of this crisis. And looking ahead to the fall semester, the beginning of the next school year, the jury's out about how much this will impact enrollment, since so many students can't come here right now, see how beautiful Burlington is and what a nice campus UVM is, and really tour the facilities. We're not really sure what impact that's going to have on our enrollment up the hill. But just want to acknowledge that that's a particularly difficult thing for students that they're going through. And it raises some issues about people who have leases starting either June or July 1st, and they're not sure if and when they're going to be coming back to campus. So it puts the student and the property owner in a very difficult position, and we're going to all have to problem solve our way through that. A couple other things. First, the number of total unemployed in the U.S. came out today. Sometimes it's hard to put Vermont in the context of the rest of the country, bearing in mind we were one of the 2 or 3 lowest unemployed rates in the country as recently as a month and a half ago, at just under 2% or around 2%. Today, the U.S. Labor Department came out with numbers. The grand total, and I think this probably understates it because there are so many people who can't even get through to their respective unemployment office in the state they live in, 22 million unemployment filings at present, which is just a huge number. The number of unemployed is being compared to the Great Depression. Obviously, the economy was a lot different back then, and our bureaucratic data is much better today than it was then, but it just gives you some sense that we're way beyond what we went through in the Great Recession in terms of the number of unemployed. Next, I do my banking with the Vermont Federal Credit Union, and I thought that it was a good, positive thing that they sent out, that they will not take the federal stimulus checks which are getting mailed to most Americans or deposited in their accounts, that if, let's say, you have an auto loan and you're slightly behind, or a mortgage with them and you're slightly behind, they are not going to take what you owe them out of that $1,200 per person check that is going to be sent from the federal government. This is really important to me because what we have learned is that the federal government, in their, I won't say infinite wisdom, what the federal government did, which I wish was unbelievable and unpredictable, but in fact it's so totally believable and predictable, are allowing some states to scoop out the money that someone might owe to a creditor before you get your $1,200, so that if it gets to your bank account, they can siphon it off to pay, some credit card company who you might have fallen behind with because of this crisis. So Vermont Federal Credit Union is probably not the only Vermont banking institution or credit union that will be making this policy. I'm glad they were proactive and didn't have to be asked to do it. The next thing, I have received some questions about, especially in the last couple of days, there was news about how the checks that are going to go out to most working age Americans, well, actually most Americans who filed any taxes, the $1,200 per person and then the $500 per kid under the age of 17. They're going to be delayed slightly because our president insisted on having his name actually on the check, which has never been done before. But we'll leave that for others to debate. But the $1,200 checks have not gone out the door in general. So let me tell you what you can expect. And this is sort of painful to hear in a way. For people who have direct deposit, when you file your taxes and you have established a direct deposit account number with the IRS, for those people, and there are 81 million Americans who fall into that category, the distribution of the $1,200 per adult checks is going to be rolled out over the course of 3 weeks, beginning on April 10th. So April 10th, April 17th, April 24th, these 3 rounds are going out to 81 million people. If you're someone like me who waits for the actual physical check, the news is not so pretty. There are 70 million of us. And beginning on Monday, the Treasury will start mailing out the capacity that they have. They can only send out 5 million checks, hard copy checks a week. So I told you there are 70 million people who do not use direct deposit, which means that it's going to take 12 to 14 weeks for them to get all of these $1,200 stimulus checks out the door. So it's pretty disappointing that they've chosen this path and that they didn't find out a mechanism to get people their money earlier. But it's the reality the federal government has presented us with. I think it'll be welcome when we get that money. But for those of you who are like me and have a hard copy check sent, it could be several months before you get your check. And we'll talk with our congressional delegation, see if there's anything that can hustle that up. But the printing of checks from the Treasury is not something that's done lightly, so it's not like we can outsource it to some company easily. And some of us are going to have to hang in there. The last thing I want to talk about really gets to this issue of where we are in the plateau. And yesterday I talked about how several states had joined together in what they're calling a compact to talk about how they reopen their economy. And I suspect that a lot of that was pushback of the president, who indicated that he was the one who was going to decide when states opened up their economy. So 6 Democratic governed states said, I don't think so. And they formed this compact to make the decision for themselves. And I talked about how my conversation with Governor Scott, he pointed out rightly that not all states are starting from the same place. Vermont has had a more restrictive public health policy than pretty much any state in America. So it's not so easy for us all to march in step in the coming days because we're not starting in the same place in terms of the public health response. So I believe tomorrow the governor will be making an announcement that farmers markets will be able to open within a week or week and a half if they follow certain protections, that certain smaller operations are going to be able to move forward if there's 1 or 2 people outdoors and there's space between them. Gentle easing of the restrictions that are in place. Many people are going to see that and say, what about me? We all wish to have this flexibility now. And I want to emphasize the sort of epidemiological, I always have trouble saying that word, but the epidemiological reason why we have to be very, very careful. So first off, that today, it's worth noting because in Vermont, while the trend has been better than it has been in recent weeks, that today more people nationally died of COVID-19 than any other day since this started. 3,302 people. Yesterday was 2,751. Those are by far the 2 highest days of the entire month-long crisis we've been in. So across the country, the problem has not gone away, and we know that as people start moving around again, the risk of infection will start up again. But closer to home, 2 of our bordering states are suffering pretty mightily right now. In New York State, the number of people who have died is 14,776. The number of positive COVID-19 test cases, 223,231. Now in Massachusetts, smaller population, but 1,108 people have died of COVID-19. Just under 30,000 have tested positive. So the reason I mention these 2 states is that our public health response in some ways does have to be aligned with our neighbors because we have a lot of back and forth between New Hampshire and Vermont, New York and Vermont, Massachusetts and Vermont, frankly, in Quebec and Vermont. And so the actions that each state takes will have an impact directly on our own public health and well-being. And so in that sense, it's good that Governor Scott has been sort of formally asked to participate in this multi-state discussion about coordinating the easing up of the economy and the public health measures. But it's a cautionary tale for people to really, really be as understanding as you can as the governor starts to ease back up the restrictions about why it's not just a floodgate being opened, but rather a spigot being slightly turned. It is entirely because the moment If we release things too much too soon, the infections begin again, then we have to shut things down again. And I think the goal is to not have to go back to today's restrictions in the weeks or months ahead, even if we're going to have to do other things differently than before. So that's a wrap. What I'm going to hope that you'll do is check the video I sent yesterday where I talked much more, if you haven't already, about the frustrations with the unemployment enrollment system. We have been crystal clear with the administration that we expect more capacity to take the calls and deal with the problems that are coming up on the web forms and all that. They hoped sometime by today or tomorrow to have a system that was significantly improving things. On the legislative side, we've both asked them to have a fallback plan, and we're starting to think about developing our own, which is not the best approach because it might take a longer time for the legislature to come up with a solution, because the process we have to go through, much easier if the governor's team comes up with it themselves. So we're trying to support them in doing the most aggressive steps possible so people don't suffer this waiting and busy signals and this sort of dehumanizing aspect of trying to get the benefits while you're in economic distress. So check that out if you haven't, and it provided a little bit more context for the decision making. Also, tomorrow I'm going to do a day of recognition of people who are working in mental health. So it'll be a video that's solely focused on people around the state who have been particularly responsive to this crisis in their communities. On Monday, I will be doing a mailbag. So all the questions that are coming in, I'll try to group them together the best I can to provide specific answers to the questions that are popping up from constituents all throughout the state. So in the meantime, I hope you continue to stay safe, and I will see you tomorrow at 5:30.